Let me tell you something first, before I start. I was nobody. You understand that part? Nobody. Just a human girl with cracked hands and a gray uniform, scrubbing marble floors in a house so old that the stone remembered kings who died before my planet was even named on their maps. And yet I am the one who said it out loud, in front of all of them, in front of the whole court. I said the words that no vampire in that hall had the courage to say. So sit still and let me tell you how it happened, because people down in the lower colonies, they hear the story now like it's a legend. They make it bigger than it was. They add wings and thunder and blood. It wasn't like that. It was quiet. It was cold. It was a scared human girl, standing on a floor she had polished with her own hands, and choosing not to lie. My name is Talia, and this is what really happened in the citadel of Knockhaven. You have to understand where I lived. Knockhaven wasn't a city. It was a mountain that someone had hollowed out and taught to breathe. It sat on a world we servants only ever called Duskmere, because the sun there was not a real sun. It was a dying red thing, held together by machines, kept dim on purpose so the old bloodlines could walk in the open without burning. The vampires didn't like light, so they built a whole world that never fully woke up. I remember the first time the transport dropped me there. I was 17. I came off a colony freighter with 40 other humans. All of us signed into service contracts we barely understood, and the doors opened and the cold came in like a hand around my throat. Not painful cold, patient cold. The kind that has all the time in the universe to reach your bones. Above us, the citadel went up and up. Black towers threaded with veins of pale light like frost that glowed. Ships hung in the sky above it, long, silent void ships shaped like blades, drifting between the spires without a single sound. No engines you could hear. No smoke. Just these enormous dark shapes sliding through the red half-dark like fish under ice. I had never seen anything so beautiful and so wrong at the same time. One of the older women, a human named Marsh who'd been in service for 30 years, she leaned close to me on that first day and said the only advice that ever mattered. Keep your eyes down, keep your mouth shut, and never ever let them see you're afraid of them because fear tastes like an invitation. I kept that advice for 8 years. 8 years I scrubbed and carried and folded and vanished into the walls the way a good servant is supposed to. 8 years I learned the rhythm of the place, when the great bells rang for the feeding halls, when the corridors emptied, which rooms you never entered even if you heard someone crying inside. And in all that time, I only spoke to the sovereign once. Just once. His name was Cashandreeve. Sovereign of the Umbral Throne, they called him, and 40 other titles that took a full minute to say. He ruled Knockhaven and Duskmere, and a long chain of dark worlds strung across the void like beads. He was old. I don't mean old like a grandfather. I mean old the way a canyon is old. You looked at him and felt small in a way that had nothing to do with height. But here is the thing that surprised me, and I'll say it plain because it matters later. He was not cruel. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. In that place, cruelty was the water they swam in. The nobles amused themselves with it. They tripped servants and laughed. They let humans go hungry for sport. There was a Lord Malroth, the Chancellor, I'll get to him, who once made a boy stand in the freezing courtyard all night because the boy had looked him in the eyes. The sovereign was not like that. The one time I spoke to him, I had knocked over a whole tray of crystal in the East reading room. It shattered everywhere. I dropped to my knees to gather it and I cut my hand open on a long shard, and I remember watching my own blood well up dark against the pale stone, and my whole body went to ice, because there is nothing more dangerous in a vampire's house than an open wound. I hadn't heard him come in. They moved like held breath. When I looked up, he was standing over me. Sovereign Cashandreeve, black coat. A face like something carved before your grandmother's grandmother was born. and his eyes were on my cut hand, and I thought, this is it. This is how a girl like me ends, on my knees over broken glass. He crouched down, slow. He took a cloth from inside his coat and he pressed it into my palm over the cut. His hands were cold, but not the patient cold of the mountain, just cold like anyone's. "Press here," he said. "You'll be fine." That was all. He stood up. He left. He never once looked at the blood the way the others would have. He looked at the wound the way a person looks at another person's pain. I never forgot it. I want you to remember it too, because everyone thinks they know what happened at the end. They think the sovereign's response that shocked the court came out of nowhere. It didn't. I saw who he was years before on my knees over broken crystal. He was a monster, sure. He was a king of monsters. But somewhere under all that stone, something in him still remembered what mercy was for. Now, let me bring in the one who nearly ruined everything. Lady Ylvin Rothmore. She arrived at Knockhaven in the coldest part of the long year, and the whole citadel changed the day she came. You could feel it in the corridors. The nobles started dressing better. The feeding halls got quieter and sharper. There was a competition in the air, thick as smoke, and none of us servants fully understood it until the announcement came. The sovereign was to be married. To her, Lady Ylvin of House Rothmore, from one of the far bead worlds, sent across the void with a fleet of ships and a dowry that they said could buy 3 colonies. She was beautiful in the way their kind is beautiful, too perfect, too still, like a portrait that turns its head to watch you leave the room. Pale gold hair, eyes the color of old wine, a voice like someone pouring silk. The match was politics, everyone said. 2 great houses, sewing their bloodlines together, strengthening the throne against the rival courts out in the dark. The nobles were thrilled. I was the one assigned to her chambers. Lucky me. I'll be honest with you. At first I thought she was just cold and I could handle cold. Cold I understood. Cold was the whole planet. But Lady Ylvin wasn't cold. She was frightened. It took me weeks to see it because she hid it well, the way you learn to hide things when you grow up in a house full of predators. But I made her bed. I laid out her clothes. I brought her the warmed blood in the silver service every evening. And you learn a person cleaning up after them. You learn them better than their friends do. She didn't sleep. Not properly. I'd come in at the gray hour and find the sheets twisted, the pillows on the floor, and her standing at the tall window looking out at the void ships, one hand pressed flat against her own stomach. Always that same gesture, her hand flat against her belly, like she was holding something in place, like she was protecting something. I didn't understand it yet. And there was the sickness. Their kind doesn't get sick. That's the whole point of them. They don't age, they don't rot, they don't catch the little illnesses that carry humans off. So the first morning I found Lady Ylvin bent over the basin, shaking, her whole body heaving. I stood in the doorway and I couldn't breathe, because I was looking at something impossible. She saw me in the mirror. For 1 second, her wine-dark eyes met mine, and there was such raw fear in them that it went straight through me. Then the mask came back down. "Get out," she said, "and if you speak of this, I'll have your tongue for the fire." I got out. I said nothing. But I knew. Some part of me already knew, the way your body knows a storm is coming before the sky changes. Something was growing inside Lady Ylvin Rothmore. And it was not supposed to be there. Let me tell you about the machines now, because the machines are how the truth finally came out, and because you need to understand what these people were. For all their old blood and their ancient houses, the vampires of Knockhaven were not primitive, far from it. They had ruled the dark for so long that they had bent every kind of science to their needs. The most important machine in the whole citadel was the thing they called the lineage reader. It sat in a chamber deep under the throne hall, and it was sacred to them. A tall column of dark glass, lit from within by slow-moving light, surrounded by instruments that hummed even when the room was empty. What it did was simple and terrible. It read blood, not just the type, the whole story of it. Every bloodline that had ever fed into you, every ancestor, every crossing of houses going back thousands of years. To them, blood was law, blood was rank, blood was everything, and the lineage reader never lied. Before any marriage between great houses, both bloodlines had to be read and recorded and matched. It was the oldest ceremony they had. They called it the verification, and any child born of a union had to be read too, to prove the bloodline, to confirm the inheritance, to place the child in the great tree of houses that ran the entire empire. You couldn't fake it. You couldn't bribe it. The machine tasted the truth in your veins, and it spoke that truth to the whole court. I want you to hold on to that, because Lady Ilve knew it too. She knew that whatever was growing inside her would, one day, stand before that machine. And the machine would tell everyone whose it was. The one who first put the real shape to my suspicions was old Bram. Bram was a human like me. He ran the kitchens, not the feeding halls, but the small human kitchens where we cooked for our own kind, the servants, down in the warm lower levels where the vampires almost never came. He was maybe 70, bent like a question mark, hands like tree roots. He'd been in service at Knockhaven longer than anyone living, human or otherwise, and he had a way of knowing things. One night I came down late, shaking, and I sat at his scarred wooden table, and I didn't mean to say anything, but it came out of me. "Bram," I whispered, "Lady Ilve. I think she's with child." The old man went very still. He put down the knife he was holding. He looked at me for a long moment with those cloudy old eyes. "You're sure?" he said. Not a question. He knew I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't. "The sickness, the way she holds herself, the nightmares." I swallowed. "Bram, their kind doesn't, I mean, it's rare, isn't it, for them to carry a child?" "Rare," he said. "Very rare. Their blood runs too cold to make new life easy. It takes them years to conceive, most of them. When it does happen, it's a great matter, a celebration." He leaned closer. "So why," he said slowly, "is your lady hiding it if it's the sovereign's child and cause for joy?" The kitchen felt very quiet then. The old ovens ticked as they cooled. "Talia," Bram said, "how long has she been here?" I counted in my head. 4 months, almost 5. "And when did the verification happen? When did the machine read her and the sovereign together?" 3 months ago, I remember, the whole citadel." I stopped, because I was doing the math, and the math was wrong. The old man watched my face change. "You see it," he said quietly. "The child was too far along. If she was 5 months into her carrying, then whatever was inside her had begun before she ever came to Knockhaven, before she ever met the sovereign, before the verification, before the betrothal, before any of it. The child was not Cassian Dreves. It couldn't be." "Oh," I breathed. "Oh no." "Now you're frightened," Bram said. "Good, you should be. Because a woman doesn't hide a thing like this unless she knows it could get her killed. And if you know it too, girl, then you're standing in the same fire she is." I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that machine under the throne hall, that column of dark glass, waiting. I saw Lady Ilve standing in front of it with the whole court watching. I saw the light moving inside the column, reading the child's blood, and I saw the truth come pouring out for everyone to hear. Because that was the thing. It wasn't a secret that could stay secret. Their whole law was built on that machine. When the child was born, it would be read. Its bloodline would be spoken aloud. And the entire court would learn all at once that the fiancée of the sovereign of the umbral throne had come to him, already carrying another man's child. The scandal alone could break the alliance between the houses. It could start a war between the bead worlds. And Ilve would not survive it. Their kind did not forgive that kind of shame. She would be given to the fire, and no one would lift a hand. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I told myself I was a maid. I kept my eyes down. I kept my mouth shut, and this was a matter for gods and monsters, not for a human girl. I almost held to that. I almost did. Then I found out who the father was. It was an accident. I want that on the record. I wasn't spying. I was the last thing anyone would suspect of spying. I was invisible. I was furniture. I was the gray uniform in the corner that no one remembers is a person. That's exactly why they talked in front of me. I was in Lady Ilvin's chamber changing the linens when she received a visitor. Late, very late, the hour when the corridors go dead. She didn't send me out. Maybe she forgot I was there. Maybe she didn't think it mattered. A human, furniture. The visitor was a man of their kind. Tall, dark-haired, sharp-jawed, with a scar across one brow that no vampire should have been able to keep. Their flesh heals everything. So a scar means a wound made by something that fights their healing. Something old. Something serious. His name was Varric Sanderholt. And the moment Lady Ilvin saw him, the mask fell off her face completely, and I saw a version of her I had never seen. Not the frightened lady. Not the perfect portrait. A woman looking at someone she loved and hated in equal measure. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If they find you." "Let them find me," he said. "Ilvin, come away with me. Tonight there's a ship." "There's always a ship with you," her voice cracked, "and it always leaves without me." I stood frozen with a bedsheet in my hands, not daring to breathe, and I listened to the whole thing come apart in front of me. They had loved each other. Years ago, two young nobles from rival houses, forbidden the whole old story. Her family had forbidden it. His house had fallen out of favor. That was the scar. He'd been marked as a traitor in some feud I never fully understood, cast out, his bloodline stained. And when the great houses arranged her marriage to the sovereign to secure the throne, Varric had come to her one last time before she was sent across the void. One last time. And now she carried the proof of it under her heart. "I didn't know," she said, and her voice broke into pieces. "I didn't know until I was already here, already promised. And now the machine will read it and they'll know it's yours, Varric, they'll know, and they'll burn me for it." "Then run," he said, "now tonight." "And go where? You have no house, no name, no world that will take you. They'll hunt us both across the whole dark and they'll catch us, and they'll make it worse." She pressed her hand to her belly, that same gesture, that same helpless, protective gesture I'd seen 100 times. "I won't run just to be caught. I won't let them tear this from me in some ditch on a border world." They argued. They wept. Even his kind can weep. I learned that night, though the tears run pale. In the end he left the way he came, through a servant's passage he shouldn't have known, and Lady Ilvin stood at the window with her hand on her belly and cried without making a single sound. And I stood in the corner with the bedsheet in my hands, and I understood something that made my knees weak. I was the only person in Knockhaven who knew the whole truth. The lady, the lover. The child, the scar, the machine that was coming for all of them. Just me, a human girl, nobody. Here is where I have to tell you about Chancellor Malroth, because a story about truth needs someone who feeds on lies, and Malroth fed on them like a man at a banquet. Malroth was the sovereign's chancellor, his chief advisor, the second most powerful creature in Knockhaven, and he hated the marriage. Not because he cared about Ilvin, because the alliance with House Rothmore strengthened the sovereign, and Malroth had spent centuries slowly, patiently building his own power in the shadow of the throne. A strong sovereign with strong allies was a sovereign who didn't need a chancellor. Malroth wanted the sovereign weak. He wanted the throne to lean on him. He was the one who noticed something first, before anyone, because a creature like Malroth is always watching for weakness, always sniffing for the wound. I saw him watching Lady Ilvin at a court gathering. Just watching. His eyes on the way she held herself, the way she'd started to move, carefully, the way a woman moves when she's protecting the center of herself. And I saw the exact moment the suspicion entered his mind, because a slow, cold smile touched the corner of his mouth. He didn't know the truth yet, but he smelled something, and a creature like that, once it smells blood, does not stop. Over the next weeks I watched him work. He assigned new servants to Ylvain's wing, his servants, his eyes. He started asking questions in that soft, poisoned voice of his. He requested, oh so respectfully, that the verification of the coming child be moved earlier, for the good of the throne, to celebrate the joyous news as soon as possible. He was building a trap. He was going to walk Lady Ylvain in front of that machine in front of the entire court, and let the truth do his killing for him. And when the sovereign was shamed and weakened, when the alliance shattered and the houses turned on each other, Malroth would be there, steady and loyal, the only thing left standing. He didn't want to save anyone. He wanted a spectacle. And I realized, sick to my stomach, that the machine's truth in Malroth's hands wasn't justice. It was a weapon. The same truth could destroy everything. Or it could be told the right way, by the right person at the right moment, to the one person who might actually choose mercy over fire. That's when the idea first came to me. The terrible idea, the one that could get me killed 10 times over. What if I got to the sovereign first? I fought it for days. Who was I? A human maid. If I walked up to the sovereign of the umbral throne and told him his bride carried another man's child, what did I think would happen? Best case, he wouldn't believe me and I'd be flogged for lying. Worst case, he'd believe me and kill me anyway, because that is what powerful people do to the messenger who brings them the worst day of their lives. And even if by some miracle he spared me, what was I doing? Betraying Lady Ylvain, a frightened woman who had shown me nothing but a lady's coldness, sure, but who had never actually harmed me, handing her to the fire a few weeks early. No, better to stay silent, better to be furniture. Let the monsters sort out the monsters. That's what I told myself. And then 2 things happened that changed my mind. The first was small. Lady Ylvain was sick again one morning, badly, and afterward she sat on the edge of her bed, gray and shaking, and she didn't order me out. She just sat there, and without looking at me, in a voice with all the ice gone out of it, she said, "Do you have a family, girl, down in the colonies?" I said I had a mother once, that I didn't know if she still lived. Ylvain nodded slowly. Her hand went to her belly. "I never wanted anything of my own," she said, almost to herself. "In my whole long life, nothing that was only mine. Everything I ever had belonged to the house, to the name, to the alliance." Her voice dropped so low I barely caught it. "This is the first thing that's mine, and they'll take it too, because of whose it is, as if it chose." She looked at me then. "You think I'm a monster," she said. "It wasn't cruel, it was tired." "No, my lady," I said, and I meant it. "I think you're afraid." Something moved in her face. For just a second, the lady and the human girl looked at each other across the whole gulf between us, and there was no gulf at all. Just 2 frightened people in a cold house full of teeth. Then the mask came down, and she told me to draw her a bath. But I had seen it. I had seen that she loved the thing inside her more than she loved her own life. And you cannot see that in a person and go back to thinking of them as furniture. The second thing was Malroth. I overheard him, again, furniture, invisible, talking to one of his creatures in a corridor. And he said something that turned my blood to water. "The child will be red the moment it draws breath," he said. "Not before. We let her carry it to term. We let the sovereign grow fond, grow hopeful, let him plan the reading like a festival, and then before the whole court the machine speaks. The shame will be perfect, total." A soft laugh. "And the whelp, of course, will not survive its first hour. A bloodline that shames the throne cannot be allowed to draw a second breath. That, at least, is mercy for the throne. The whelp will not survive its first hour. The child." He wasn't just planning to destroy Ilving. He was planning to let the baby be born in front of everyone, just so its death would land as hard as possible on the sovereign. The child was a prop to him. A newborn was a prop. And something in me, I don't know how to explain it except to say that something in me stood up. I had kept my eyes down for 8 years. I had kept my mouth shut. I had been furniture, been invisible, been nobody, and I had survived. That was the human way in Knockhaven. Survive, endure, stay small. But there is a place past which a person cannot make themselves small. And I had just found mine. I would not stand in the corner while a monster used a newborn baby as a knife. I would not. I couldn't reach the sovereign directly. You don't just walk up to a king. But I knew his schedule the way all servants know the schedules of the great, because we are the ones who make their world run. And I knew that every third night, before the long sleep, he went alone to the high observatory at the top of the citadel to watch the void ships come in. Alone, no guards inside, just him and the dark and the great window and the silent ships. I planned it for a week. I told no one, not even Bram, especially not Bram, because if it went wrong, I didn't want the old man dragged into the fire with me. I chose the night. I chose the words. I lay awake going over them until they were smooth as river stones. And on the chosen night, when the corridors went dead and the great bells fell silent, I put down my cleaning cloth and I climbed. I climbed all the way up through the sleeping citadel, past the sentries by keeping to the servant passages, up the cold black stairs that spiraled into the spire, until my legs shook and my breath came in clouds, and I came out into the high observatory of Knockhaven with my heart trying to break out of my chest. He was there, Sovereign Cassian Dreve, standing at the great curved window with his back to me, looking out at the red dark and the ships, small against that vast black glass, alone in a way that even a king is allowed to be alone sometimes when he thinks no one is watching. I stood in the doorway. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to go back down, to be furniture, to live. He spoke without turning. "You climbed a long way," he said, "for a girl who should be asleep." My mouth went dry. "Speak," he said, still not turning. "You didn't climb my whole citadel to stand in a doorway." I opened my mouth. And here, right here, is where the story really begins. But that, I think, is where I'll stop for tonight. Because what I said next, and what he did after, is the part they've turned into legend down in the colonies. The part with the whole court and the machine, and the response that no one, not one creature in that hall, ever saw coming. I'll tell you that part next. Just remember, before I do, I was nobody. A human girl with cracked hands and a gray uniform. And I was about to say the truest thing anyone had said in that house in 1,000 years. I told you I'd stopped at the doorway, at the top of the citadel in the high observatory, with the sovereigns back to me, and the void ships sliding through the red dark beyond the great glass. I told you he'd said speak. So here is what I said. I want to get the words right because I've thought about them every day since. I didn't say them cleverly. I didn't ease into it. I'd planned 100 smooth sentences over 100 sleepless nights, and standing there with him waiting, every one of them fell out of my head. So the truth came out the only way truth ever really comes out. Plain, ugly, all at once. "Your fiancé carries a child," I said, "and it isn't yours." The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. He didn't move. For a long moment he just stood there at the window, and I watched his shoulders, and I thought, this is the last thing I will ever see. This black window, these silent ships, the back of a king who is about to turn around and end me. When he did turn, it was slow. I'd braced for rage. I'd braced for that terrible stillness their kind gets right before they strike, the stillness of a snake. I was ready to die. I'd made my peace with it on the stairs. What I wasn't ready for was his face. Because he already knew. I saw it the instant he turned. It wasn't shock in his eyes, it was grief. Old, settled, bone-deep grief. The kind you carry so long it stops looking like pain and starts looking like weather. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone who has just said out loud the thing he has been unable to say to himself. "How long," he said quietly, "have you known?" My legs almost went out from under me. My lord, How long?" "Weeks," I whispered, "a few weeks." He nodded slowly and turned back to the window. "I've known for longer," he said. "I want to stop here and tell you what that meant, because at the time I didn't understand, and it changes everything." He had known. The sovereign of the umbral throne, oldest and coldest power on a dozen dark worlds, the creature the whole citadel trembled before, he had looked at his own bride, done the same arithmetic I had done and understood. Long before me. He was not a fool. He was the least foolish creature who ever lived. And he had said nothing, done nothing. He had let it lie. I couldn't understand it. In that house with those people, knowledge like that was a blade. He could have exposed her the day he knew. He could have quietly had her killed and blamed a fever, married someone else, saved his own face. That was the vampire way. That was the sensible way. Instead, he had carried it in silence, alone, for months. A king pretending not to know the thing that could destroy him. Why? I found out why in the next thing he said. "Do you know," he said, still facing the glass, "how long I have been alive, girl?" I said I didn't. "Neither do I, not exactly. Long enough that the counting stopped meaning anything." He was quiet a moment. "In all that time I have been married 4 times, political, all of them. Bloodlines and alliances and the endless arithmetic of the throne. 4 wives. I felt nothing for any of them and they felt nothing for me, and we did our cold duty and made our cold heirs, and it was all exactly as it was supposed to be." The ships drifted past. He watched them. "When House Rothmore offered me Ilvain, it was the same arithmetic. Another alliance, another cold bargain." He paused. "And then she arrived and I saw that she was frightened. Not of me, of something she carried. And I watched her, the way I have watched everything for 1,000 years, and I understood what it was. And do you know what I felt?" I shook my head. He couldn't see it, but he went on anyway. "Relief," he said. "I didn't understand." "She loved someone," he said softly. "She had loved someone so completely that she had risked everything for it, her name, her house, her life. And she carried the proof of that love inside her, and she was willing to burn rather than give it up." He finally turned to look at me. "In 1,000 years, girl, no one has ever loved me like that. Not once. And here was this woman who had it, this thing I have never had, this warm, terrible thing, and my court would burn her for it. Burn her and the child, for the crime of having felt something real in a house of stone." His jaw tightened. So I said nothing, because I could not think of a single way to save her, and I could not bring myself to be the one who lit the fire. I stood there in the cold with tears running down my face, and I did not even know when they'd started. Because I understood him now. This ancient, terrible creature. He wasn't protecting his pride. He'd never had the thing she had, and rather than destroy it out of spite, he had chosen to guard it in silence, even as it doomed him. "Then why," I managed, "are you letting the verification happen? Malroth is moving it forward, heel." "I know what Malroth is doing." A shadow crossed his face. "He is cleverer than I have let him believe for a long time now. He thinks he has trapped me. He thinks he will walk her in front of the machine before the whole court and let the truth ruin me, and let the child be born only to be killed." His eyes came up to mine, and now there was something cold in them, but it wasn't aimed at me. "You know about the child, what he means to do." "Yes," I whispered. "Then you know why I could not act. If I moved to protect her, I confirmed the truth. The court sees the sovereign shielding a shamed bride and her lover's child, and the houses fall on me like wolves. If I do nothing, she burns and the child dies. Every path I have walked in my mind 1,000 times, every single one ends in fire." His voice dropped. I am the most powerful creature on a dozen worlds, and I have not been able to find one road out of this that does not end with that woman's death." And then he looked at me, really looked at me, a human maid, nobody, furniture, and he said the thing I will hear in my head until I die. "You climbed my whole citadel to tell me a truth I already knew. You risked the fire to do it. Why?" I didn't have a clever answer, so I gave him the plain one. "Because a baby shouldn't be a knife," I said. "Whatever's in her belly didn't choose whose it was, and I couldn't stand in the corner and watch them make it die for something it never did." For a long moment, the sovereign of the umbral throne looked at a crying human girl in a gray uniform. And then slowly, something changed in his face. The grief was still there, but under it, for the first time, I saw something wake up. "Say that again," he said quietly. "My lord." The child didn't choose whose it was. He said it slowly, turning it over like a man turning a key in a lock he's been fighting for months. "It didn't choose, and the machine reads the blood. It reads whose it is." His eyes sharpened, faster now, a mind that had been alive 1,000 years suddenly running at full speed. The machine reads lineage, ancestry, every house that fed into that blood back and back and back. "Yes," I said, not following. He was very still now, but it was a different stillness, not grief, not a snake before the strike. The stillness of a king who has just found the one road he could not see. "Girl," he said, "what is your name?" "Talia, my lord." "Talia?" He said it like he was filing it somewhere permanent. "Go back to your quarters, speak of this to no one, sleep if you can." Something almost like warmth touched his voice. "You have done a braver thing tonight than any of my generals have done in 500 years. Now let me do mine." I didn't understand. I wanted to ask, "But you don't question a king," and something in the way he said it told me the questioning time was over. I went. I climbed back down through the sleeping citadel with my legs shaking, and behind me, at the top of the world, the oldest creature on a dozen worlds stood at the black glass and began, at last, to move. The verification was set for 11 nights later. Malruth got his festival. He got everything he'd planned. I have to give the monster that. The great throne hall was opened, the one they used maybe once a generation, with its ceiling lost in dark so high the light couldn't reach it, and its floor of black stone polished to a mirror. Every noble house in Nocthaven was summoned. The bead world sent envoys. Ships hung in the sky above the citadel in numbers I'd never seen, so many that the red dark was cut with their long, silent shapes. They all came to see the joyous verification of the sovereign's coming child. And Malruth stood near the throne in his finest black, and I watched his face the whole time, and I knew that creature thought he had already won. He thought he was hours away from watching an empire fall into his patient hands. I was there because someone has to carry the trays and stand against the wall. Furniture. Invisible. The best seat in the whole hall for someone who wanted to see everything and be seen by no one. The lineage reader had been brought up from its deep chamber for the occasion. It stood before the throne, that tall column of dark glass, lit from within by slow-moving light, humming its low, sacred hum. The whole court arranged itself around it in a great crescent, house by house, rank by rank, a sea of pale, beautiful faces and dark old eyes. And then they brought in Lady Ilvin. She was magnificent, I'll say that till I die. Whatever else she walked into that hall like a queen walking to a scaffold, chin up, hands folded over the swell of her belly, and she did not let one flicker of fear show on her face. She knew exactly what was about to happen. She knew the machine would speak and the court would learn and the fire would follow for her and for the child both. And she walked in anyway with her head high, because she would not give them the pleasure of her terror. I have never respected anyone more than I respected Lady Ilvin Rothmore in that moment. Her eyes found mine once across the great hall, just once, and I don't know what she saw in my face. Maybe she guessed I'd betrayed her, maybe she thought I'd wept for her, I'll never know. She looked away. The sovereign sat on the umbral throne, still as carved stone, and gave nothing away. Malroth stepped forward with a scroll and began to speak. Oh, he was smooth. He spoke of joy, of the great blessing of a child come to the throne, so rare, so precious, of the ancient rite of verification, that the whole court might witness the sacred bloodline of the heir and rejoice. Every word a knife wrapped in silk. He was savoring it. He was going to make them all stand there and celebrate right up until the machine turned the celebration into a massacre. Let the mother approach the reader, Malroth said, and his voice was warm as a father's, that we may all know the blood of the child she carries and honor it. Lady Ilvin's chin lifted a fraction higher. She stepped forward, and the sovereign said, "Stop." One word, quiet, but it went through that hall like a blade through water, and every creature in it went still. The sovereign rose from the throne. He came down the steps, slow, unhurried, and he crossed to stand between Lady Ilvain and the machine, and he faced his court. "Before the reader speaks," he said, "the sovereign will speak. That is my right. It is the oldest right of the throne, and I invoke it." Malroth's smooth face flickered, just for an instant. This wasn't in his plan. "Of course, my lord," he said carefully, "the throne may always—" "Be silent, Malroth." The chancellor shut his mouth. I saw the first thread of real fear go through him, and I could have wept with the pleasure of it. The sovereign looked out over his court. 1,000 years old, utterly calm. "You have come," he said, "to witness the blood of my heir, and you shall. But first you will hear from me a truth about the reader that this court has forgotten, because it has been a very long time since any of you cared to remember it." He laid one pale hand on the dark glass of the machine. "This engine reads lineage," he said, "ancestry. It reads every house whose blood has flowed into the blood before it. That is its purpose, and it does not lie. We built it so that no child of the great houses could ever be denied their line, and no pretender could ever claim a line that was not theirs." He paused. "It reads whose blood a child carries, that and only that. It does not read the act of making. It does not read a knight or a name or a father's face. It reads houses. It reads lineage. Do you all understand the difference?" A ripple went through the court. They didn't understand yet. Neither did I. But Malroth did. I saw it hit him. I saw the exact moment the chancellor understood what the sovereign was about to do, and I saw his face go the color of ash. "No," Malroth breathed, "you cannot." "Bring the second subject," the sovereign said. The great doors at the far end of the hall opened, and guards brought in Varric Sanderholt. The whole court gasped as one. The traitor, the scarred outcast, the fallen noble, the stained bloodline, dragged into the highest hall in Knockhaven in chains. Lady Ilvain made a sound I will never forget, a small broken sound, and her hands pressed hard over her belly, and I thought, he's going to do it. The sovereign's going to expose them both. He lied to me. He's going to burn them all. I was wrong. I was so wrong. "This man," the sovereign said, "is Varric Sanderholt, once of a great house, marked traitor, stripped of name, cast down." He looked at Varric with those ancient eyes, and by the blood in his veins, still of the old line, the reader will confirm it. His ancestry is written in him whether his house wants it or not. He turned back to the court. "Here is the truth I invoke my right to speak. The child my bride carries shares a bloodline with this man." A gasp, sharp. He raised a hand and it died. "It shares a bloodline with him, because I have named it so." The whole hall went silent. "Under the oldest law of the throne," the sovereign said, and now his voice rolled out through the great dark like something out of the founding of the world, "the sovereign may adopt any bloodline into his own. It is the law of the grafted line. It has not been used in 900 years, but it has never been struck. When the sovereign grafts a line, the reader reads that line as true, as his own, as throne blood. There is no forgery in it. There is no lie. The machine will read the child's ancestry, and it will name the houses that made it, and every one of those houses will now be mine, because as of this moment before all of you as witness, I graft the line of Sanderholt into the umbral throne. Varric Sanderholt is restored. His house is raised. His blood is throne blood, and any child that carries it. He looked at Lady Ilvin, and something in his ancient face was almost gentle. Is an heir of the umbral throne, by blood, by law, by the reader's own voice. Let the machine speak and let it say so. I have to stop and make you understand what he had done, because it was the cleverest and kindest thing I have ever seen anyone do, and it happened so fast that half the court didn't catch it until it was over. The machine couldn't lie. That was Malroth's whole weapon. The machine would read the child's blood and name the houses in it, and one of those houses would be Sanderholt, not Dreve, and everyone would know the child was Varric's. The sovereign didn't fight that. He couldn't, so he didn't try. Instead, he changed what the truth meant. He took the outcast-stained line and with one ancient law made it his own. Now when the machine named Sanderholt blood in the child, it wasn't naming a scandal. It was naming an heir, because Sanderholt was throne blood now. He'd said so before the whole court, and the law let him say it. The machine would tell the exact same truth Malroth had built his whole trap around. And that same truth would now crown the child instead of killing it. He didn't hide the blood. He honored it. He reached into the one weapon Malroth had, the machine's perfect honesty, and he turned it in the Chancellor's hand until it pointed the other way. And there was nothing Malroth could do, because to object, he'd have to stand in front of the whole court and argue against the sovereign restoring a bloodline, which meant admitting he'd been hoping to read that bloodline as a shame. He'd have to reveal his own trap to spring it. He'd have to show the whole hall that he had wanted the sovereign's heir dead. He was caught in his own machine, the truth-teller undone by truth. "Read the child," the sovereign said. And they read it. Lady Ilvin stood before the column of dark glass with her hands over her belly and her head high, and the slow light moved inside the machine, and it hummed its ancient hum, and then it spoke. It spoke in the old ceremonial way, naming houses, naming lines, a long roll of ancestry going back and back into the dark of history. And near the end of that long roll, clear as a bell in the silent hall, it named the line of Sanderholt. And because the sovereign had grafted that line an hour before, the reader named it as throne blood, as heir blood, as true. The machine confirmed, in its voice that could not lie, that Lady Ilvin Rothmore carried an heir of the umbral throne. Which was now exactly true. The hall erupted. Not in scandal, in celebration, because that is what the court had been summoned to celebrate, and the machine had just told them they were right too. The houses cheered. The envoys of the bead worlds bowed, and Malroth stood in the middle of all of it with his ash-gray face and his ruined trap, unable to say a single word, because every word he had left would only condemn himself. Lady Ilvin turned from the machine, and she was crying openly now, no mask, tears running down that perfect face, and she looked at the sovereign with an expression I don't have the words for. He had known. All along he had known, and instead of burning her, he had raised her lover from the dead and crowned her child and turned her shame into a coronation, in front of the entire court, without one word of it touching her honor. Across the hall, Varric Sanderholt stood in his chains, well, in what had been his chains. The guards were already unlocking them, and stared at the sovereign like a man looking at something he had no framework to understand. And the sovereign of the umbral throne climbed the steps back to his seat, and settled into it, tired and ancient and utterly victorious, and let his court cheer a truth they didn't fully understand. I have to tell you what happened to Malroth, because I know you're wondering. The sovereign did not execute him. I thought he would. Everyone thought he would. 3 nights later, in a smaller hall, the sovereign stripped Malroth of his chancellorship and every title he held, and named the specific thing he had planned, the child born only to be killed before the court, out loud, in front of the assembled houses, in a flat, quiet voice that was worse than any shouting. He let them all hear exactly what their chancellor had intended. And then he did not kill him. He exiled him to a border world at the far edge of the bead chain, a cold, nothing world, stripped of name and power to live out his endless life as nobody. Furniture. I understood later why he chose that instead of death. Death would have been quick. Death would have made Malroth a martyr to the houses who'd quietly backed him. But to take everything from a creature like that, the power, the standing, the game he'd played for centuries, and leave him alive to feel its absence forever, on a world where he was no one. That was the crueler thing, and the sovereign knew it. He was still a king of monsters, remember. He just never once pretended otherwise. Lady Ilvin and Varric were married within the season. I know how that sounds. She was the sovereign's fiancée. How does she end up wed to the man whose child she carried with the sovereign's blessing? But that was the last piece of it, and it was pure cash and drive. He released her from the betrothal himself, publicly, framed as his own gracious choice. A sovereign so magnanimous he would give up his own bride so that a restored house might flourish. It cost him nothing but pride, and pride was the one thing that ancient creature had in endless supply. He gave it up like a man setting down a bag he'd carried too long. He kept the alliance with House Rothmore anyway. The grafted line had tangled all the houses together too thoroughly to unpick. He got his political stability. He got a court that thought him wise and generous beyond measure. And Ilvin got the one thing she'd wanted, the thing she'd told me about that gray morning, sitting sick on the edge of her bed, something that was only hers. The child was born healthy, a girl. I was there. Lady Ilvin asked for me specifically, which I still don't have the words for. She held that baby against her chest and she looked up at me over its head, this woman who'd once threatened to feed my tongue to the fire, and she said, "You're the one who went to him, aren't you? You're the one who climbed the tower." I froze. "I heard the servants talk," she said. "A girl went up to the observatory the night before everything changed. I always wondered." Her eyes were wet. "It was you." I didn't know what to say. I'd betrayed her in a way. I'd carried her secret to the most dangerous creature alive. "My lady," I started, "I only—" "You saved her," Ilvin said, and she looked down at her daughter. "Whatever you meant to do, you saved her life and mine." She was quiet a long moment. "Why, you owed me nothing. I was never kind to you." And I told her the same plain thing I'd told the king. "A baby shouldn't be a knife," I said. "That's all. It never chose whose it was." Lady Ilvin Rothmore, Sanderholt, now looked at me for a long time, and then she did something no noble had done in my 8 years in that house. She thanked me, a human by name. "Thank you, Talia," she said. I never scrubbed another floor in Knockhaven. The sovereign called me to the observatory one last time, the night before Ilvin's wedding. Same black glass, same silent ships sliding through the red dark. He stood in the same place, and for a moment it was exactly like the first night, and my heart climbed into my throat all over again. "You're leaving my service," he said, not a question. "Am I, my lord?" "You are," he turned. There was something almost like humor in those ancient eyes, worn and faint like sunlight through a mile of water. "I've signed you free of your contract, and I've placed a sum in your name, enough that you need never carry a tray again. There's a ship leaving for the outer colonies in 3 nights. If your mother still lives, girl, you'll have the means to find her." I couldn't speak. 8 years of keeping my eyes down, and I stood there in front of a king and could not make my mouth work. "Why?" I finally managed. The same question everyone kept asking all the way through this story. "Why?" He was quiet for a while, looking out at his ships. "In 1,000 years," he said, "everyone who has ever come to me has come with a lie dressed as a truth. Flatterers, schemers, creatures like Malroth who wanted something and hid it behind pretty words." He looked at me. One person in 1,000 years climbed my whole citadel in the dark to bring me the worst truth of my life, expecting to die for it, wanting nothing. Nothing at all. Only that a child she'd never met would not be born to be a weapon. He was silent a moment. "I have ruled the dark for longer than your species has had a written word," he said. "And a human maid taught me something about mercy that I had forgotten I ever knew. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand what you are?" I shook my head because I didn't. I still don't fully. "You are the bravest person," said the sovereign of the umbral throne, oldest power on a dozen dark worlds, "who has ever stood in this room, and that includes me. So that's the true story. That's what really happened in Nocthaven, under the red dying sun, in the citadel carved into a mountain that learned to breathe. Not wings and thunder and blood, like they tell it in the colonies now. Just a frightened woman who loved a child more than her own life. An outcast dragged from the dark and raised back into the light. An ancient king who had never once been loved, choosing to protect a love that wasn't his, and finding the one road out of the fire by turning a monster's own weapon around in his hand. And a human girl, nobody, furniture, gray uniform, cracked hands, who climbed a tower in the dark to say a true thing, because she couldn't stand in the corner and watch a baby be made into a knife. I found my mother, by the way, 3 colonies out, older, grayer, alive. I live near her now, under a real sun, on a world that wakes all the way up every morning. Sometimes I think about that cold citadel and those silent ships, and I can hardly believe I was ever there at all. But I keep one thing, to remind myself it was real. A cloth, old now and faded. The one an ancient king pressed into my bleeding hand years ago, when I was nothing to him, and he had no reason at all to be kind. "Press here," he told me that day. "You'll be fine." He was right. I was. And it turns out even the oldest, coldest thing in the dark can remember, if someone reminds it, what mercy was always for.